My name is William Roberts, and the story I'm about to share is a testimony to the deepest darkness a human being can face. It's a story that defies the comprehension of reason and unveils the darkest secrets of the world beyond the veil of reality. It all started a few years ago when my life collapsed before my eyes. I was a happy man, married to the most incredible woman I had ever met, and blessed with a daughter who was the light of my life. But in a terrible car accident, I lost everything I loved most in this world. My wife Sarah and my little Emily were taken from me so brutally that my heart broke into a million pieces. In the days and months that followed, I was lost in an abyss of pain and despair. The darkness seemed to engulf me completely, and I couldn't see any reason to go on living. I clung to the memories of them, but even that became torture, as all I could remember was what I had lost. It was in this moment of absolute despair that I made the most terrible mistake of my life. In my desperate search to find some relief, some way to bring back those I loved, I came across an obscure sect that promised to do the impossible: raise the dead. With my mind clouded by grief and insane hope, I accepted the pact they offered. I surrendered my soul to dark forces, in exchange for the promise of getting my wife and daughter back. I should have realized that I was making a pact with the devil himself, but at that moment, I was willing to pay any price, and that's how my nightmare began. The ritual took place in a dark, damp cave, far from the eyes of the world. The sect members chanted in an ancient language, while drawing grotesque symbols on the floor with what looked like blood. The air grew thicker and thicker, charged with a sinister energy that gave me goosebumps. Then, in a moment of pure terror, an evil presence appeared before us. It wasn't a physical being, but a dark, amorphous mass that seemed to suck in all the light around it. A deep, guttural voice resounded in my mind, promising to fulfill my wish in exchange for my soul. Blinded by despair, I accepted the pact without hesitation. And then, before my incredulous eyes, Sarah and Emily appeared, as if they had never left. I hugged them, crying with happiness, unable to believe that they had returned. In the days that followed, everything seemed perfect. My family was together again, and I was willing to do anything to keep it that way. But I soon began to notice strange little details, blank stares, erratic behavior, and moments when they didn't seem to recognize me. As time went by, these incidents became more frequent and disturbing. Objects moved on their own. Strange sounds echoed through the house, and I had the constant feeling that I was being watched. My heart was filled with doubts about what had really brought my loved ones back. And it was then that the terrible truth hit me. I had made a pact with dark forces, and they weren't willing to let me go so easily. My soul was doomed, and the devil was just beginning to play with me. As the days went by, the evil presence I had summoned grew stronger and more oppressive. I could feel its dark influence hanging over us, like a black cloud about to collapse. The voices started first, hissing whispers that echoed off the walls, disturbingly calling my name. Then came the visions, terrifying apparitions that haunted me both awake and asleep. I would see shadows moving around corners, deformed faces staring back at me from the mirror, and sometimes even my loved ones would turn into hideous creatures before my eyes. But worst of all was seeing Sarah and Emily gradually change. The sparkle that used to light up their eyes was gone, replaced by a terrifying emptiness. Their smiles became distorted caricatures, and their gestures began to become erratic and violent. I remember one night when Emily came into my room, her black eyes like bottomless wells. She stared at me for long moments, her mouth twisting into a sick smile. Then, without warning, she started scratching her own face with her nails, tearing the skin into bloody strips. I screamed, trying to hold her back, but she was incredibly strong, much more so than a child should be. It was at that moment that the terrible truth hit me. The demon hadn't really brought my family back. Instead, He had created hideous creatures using their bodies as vessels, just to torment me. My wife and daughter had become mere puppets in the grip of an evil force beyond my comprehension, and I knew, deep down in my torn heart, that this was only the beginning of my endless torment. As soon as I realized the true nature of the situation, I went into a desperate frenzy to break the pact. I scoured all the old books and grimoires I could find, looking for any clue or ritual that could free me from this curse. I tried exorcisms, prayers, even blood sacrifices, anything to drive out the evil presence that had consumed my family. But each failed attempt only fueled the demon's rage, and it retaliated in increasingly cruel ways. Sarah and Emily became instruments of torture in the hands of that disgusting creature. They attacked me without warning, scratching and biting my flesh with supernatural force. And what was worse were the moments when they seemed to momentarily return to lucidity, only to beg me for help with eyes full of terror. The scenes of violence intensified every day. I witnessed my own daughter gouging out her mother's eyes with her bare hands, laughing sickly as the blood flowed. Sarah, for her part, stabbed me repeatedly with a kitchen knife, leaving scars that would never heal. But the physical torture was just the tip of the iceberg. The demon delighted in tormenting my mind, projecting illusions so vivid and disturbing that I could no longer distinguish reality. I could hear the agonizing screams of my loved ones echoing through the corridors, only to find them sitting in silence when I looked for them. In the midst of this terrifying chaos, the demon revealed his true intentions. He had no interest in simply killing me or taking my soul immediately. No, his plan was much more sadistic. He intended to suck my soul out slowly, prolonging my suffering for as long as possible. It was then that I realized that my life had become an endless hell from which there was no escape. The devil had trapped me in an endless cycle of torment, and the only certainty I had left was the absolute darkness that awaited me at the end. The atrocities I had witnessed at the hands of Sarah and Emily were beyond any horror my mind could conceive. They were no longer my loved ones. They were mere carcasses possessed by demonic forces, forced to commit the most disgusting acts. I remember one night when I found Emily sitting on the kitchen floor, playing with the entrails of a dead cat. Her little fingers were covered in blood, and she was laughing sickly as she pulled out the organs one by one. When she saw me, she smiled with that empty, terrifying expression, offering me a bloody piece as if it were a present. Another time, I woke up in the middle of the night to Sarah sitting next to me, holding a pair of rusty scissors. She began to cut her own face, tearing off strips of skin with slow, methodical movements. Blood trickled down her neck as she hummed a sinister tune, her black eyes fixed on me. My house, which had once been a loving home, had turned into a nightmare scenario. The dark corners seemed to pulsate with the presence of evil entities, watching my every move. Disturbing sounds echoed through the corridors, agonizing screams, demonic laughter, and scratches on the walls. Any moment of hope was quickly crushed by the demon. Whenever I tried to pray or find the strength to resist, it retaliated with a new wave of torment. I saw my loved ones being mutilated before my eyes, or heard their voices pleading for help in a labyrinth of illusions. The line between what was real and what was mere illusion became increasingly blurred. I began to question my own sanity, unable to trust anything my senses told me. The devil was toying with me, distorting reality in such subtle and cruel ways that I felt lost in an endless labyrinth. I remember a day when I woke up in a hospital room, tied to a bed. Nurses came in and out, assuring me that everything would be fine. But then suddenly the walls began to bleed, and the nurses' faces contorted into demonic masks. I screamed, begging for help, only to find that I was lying in my own bed, alone once again. The psychological torment was endless, a slow and insidious torture that was slowly eating away at my mind. I wondered if I would ever be the same again, or if the darkness that consumed me would eventually destroy me completely. as the demon's hold on me grew stronger. He began to use my own memories and innermost secrets as weapons against my weakened psyche. It plumbed the depths of my mind, bringing out my darkest fears and insecurities. I remember being tormented by visions of a terrible incident from my childhood, which I had buried in the deepest recesses of my mind. I saw my father, a violent and alcoholic man, beating my mother into unconsciousness, while I hid under the bed, paralyzed with terror. The demon distorted these memories, projecting them in an endless loop, ever more vivid and terrifying. I could feel the punches, hear the screams of agony, and the smell of blood was so real it was suffocating. It made me relive my greatest trauma again and again, until I doubted my own reality. But the psychological torture didn't stop there. The demon manipulated my perceptions in increasingly subtle and cruel ways. I would see Sarah and Emily writhing in agony, begging for my help, only to discover that they were sitting quietly, watching me with blank stares. They had become mere instruments in the clutches of that evil creature, used to break me mentally and emotionally. I saw them commit acts so disgusting and disturbing that my mind could barely process them. On one occasion, I witnessed Emily devour a live rabbit, tearing off chunks of flesh with her teeth as the animal screamed in pain. Blood dripped down her face, and she stared at me with those lifeless black eyes, chewing slowly. Again, Sarah forced me to watch her mutilate herself in unspeakable ways, tearing off chunks of her own flesh with a kitchen knife. She laughed hysterically as the blood gushed out and I screamed in agony, begging for it to stop. My desperation reached unimaginable levels. I felt like a prisoner in my own mind, surrounded by horrors beyond human comprehension. The darkness was slowly engulfing me, suffocating any remnants of hope I might have had. It was at this point that I began to contemplate suicide as the only possible way out. I no longer saw any point in continuing to live in this endless hell. The pain was simply too much to bear, and the prospect of an eternal existence in this torment seemed far worse than the oblivion of death. After endless weeks of being tormented by demonic forces, I had a brief glimmer of hope. In a rare moment of mental clarity, I was able to study the pact I had made more closely. And it was there that I found a possible weakness. The agreement mentioned something about the exchange of souls being valid only if mine remained intact. If I managed to damage my own soul somehow, perhaps I could annul the pact and free my family from this eternal curse. Desperate, I began to research methods of corrupting my own spiritual essence. Some ancient texts spoke of dark rituals involving sacrifices and self-flagellation. Others mentioned hallucinogenic substances capable of distorting the soul. No matter how disturbing or dangerous it was, I was willing to try anything to escape this endless nightmare. So, one dark night, I performed an obscure ritual, cutting my own veins and letting my blood drip onto arcane symbols drawn on the floor. But the demon was not at all pleased with my attempt to break the deal. As soon as it realized my intentions, its fury was unleashed with terrifying intensity. Waves of evil energy swept through my house, knocking over furniture and shattering glass. And then the physical torture came back in full force. Sarah and Emily attacked me mercilessly, scratching and biting my flesh until I was covered in open wounds. The demon used their bodies as weapons, forcing them to inflict the most terrible agonies on me. I remember being tied to a chair while Emily brought in sharp objects, knives, scissors, pieces of broken glass. One by one, she drove those blades into my flesh, smiling with that empty, disturbing look. Blood dripped all over my body and I screamed until I lost my voice. Another time, I was forced to watch as Sarah pulled out her own teeth with pliers, one by one, spitting blood and bits of gum into my face. She laughed hysterically, her black eyes fixed on mine, while I begged desperately for it to stop. The demon delighted in my suffering, whispering in my mind that this was only the beginning. He revealed that his true intention was to drag me down into the darkest depths of despair, making me completely lose faith in humanity. And as I lay there, bleeding and broken, I realized that perhaps he was already getting what he wanted. For in the midst of such horror, I felt my own humanity fading away, replaced only by endless darkness. The deeper I plunged into the depths of despair, the more the boundaries of decency and morality were violated before my eyes. The devil was forcing Sarah and Emily to commit acts so disgusting and unthinkable that they defied all human comprehension. I remember one night when I was tied up, unable to look away, while my own daughter was raped in unspeakable ways by that disgusting creature who had taken over her mother's body. Emily's agonized screams echoed off the walls while the demon laughed, delighting in my suffering. Again, I was forced to watch as Sarah ripped a man alive, tearing off chunks of flesh with her bare hands as he begged for mercy. Blood gushed out, and she licked her lips with that empty, disturbing expression. Each act was more abominable than the last, violating every moral and ethical taboo that I once believed to be sacred. The devil forced me to witness the most vile and depraved acts, just to feed on my despair and anguish. He delighted in my torment, sucking out every ounce of hope and humanity that remained in me. His hissing whispers filled my mind, telling me that this was just the beginning of an eternity of suffering. As time passed, moments of lucidity became rarer and rarer. I was lost in a maze of illusions and nightmares, unable to distinguish reality from fantasy. The demon played with my perception, distorting everything around me into a dark and disturbing caricature. One moment I was tied up in a damp, dark basement while hideous creatures surrounded me, tearing chunks out of my flesh with sharp claws. The next moment I was lying on my bed, covered in a cold sweat, wondering if it had all just been a terrible dream. But then the visions came back, more vivid and terrifying than ever. I saw Sarah and Emily writhing in agony, begging for my help, only to discover that they had disappeared again, leaving me alone with the demon. And it was in this state of utter despair that the demon revealed its final plans to me. He intended to keep me in this endless cycle of torture, slowly sucking away every ounce of sanity and humanity that remained in my soul. "Your agony will be eternal," he whispered, his voice resonating in my mind like a dark echo. "You will live in this endless nightmare until everything that was once human in you has completely faded away." And as its tentacles of darkness wrapped around me, squeezing my body and soul, I realized that this was perhaps the worst torture of all. The prospect of an eternal existence in this endless hell, devoid of any hope or rescue. When all seemed lost and endless darkness was the only prospect awaiting me, I mustered all my remaining strength for one last desperate attempt to break the demonic pact. I scoured every grimoire and ancient text I could find, looking for any clue or ritual that might invoke higher forces to help me. Finally, I found mention of an ancient ceremony that could supposedly annul contracts made with dark beings. It involved the creation of a sacred circle, the shedding of blood and the recitation of words of power in an archaic language. Without hesitation, I gathered all the necessary ingredients and performed the ritual on a full moon night. I traced the arcane symbols on the ground with my own blood, while chanting strange chants that made my lips burn. The energy in the air grew denser and denser, charged with an ancient and powerful force. But the demon was not at all pleased with my attempt to escape its clutches. As soon as it realized what I was doing, its fury was unleashed with overwhelming force. A wave of evil energy swept through the room, shattering the sacred circle and shattering everything around me. Suddenly, I was surrounded by a horde of demonic creatures, their twisted, grotesque forms writhing around me. They grabbed me with sharp claws, tearing at my flesh as they dragged me into the darkest depths of this existential plane. It was then that the demon revealed its true form, a black, amorphous mass that seemed to suck in all the light around it. Its tentacles wrapped around me, squeezing me hard enough to crush bones, and its voice, terrifying and guttural, resounded in my mind. "Did you really think you could escape me? I am the primordial darkness, the source of all your fears and nightmares. Your fate was already sealed the moment you gave your soul to me." And then the torture reached its peak. Scenes of graphic violence and psychological horror unfolded before my eyes, each one more disturbing than the last. I watched as Sarah was dismembered alive, her limbs being torn off one by one as she screamed in agony. Emily had her flesh slowly devoured by worms while still breathing, her face contorted into a mask of pure terror. But worst of all was the feeling of having my own mind violated by the demon. He was searching my innermost thoughts, distorting my memories and projecting my worst insecurities and fears. I felt myself being torn apart inside, my essence being ripped to shreds. And it was in this moment of absolute despair that the demon revealed the only way to break the pact. I would have to make the ultimate sacrifice, giving up what I loved most in life. "The choice is yours," he whispered, his voice echoing in my mind like a death sentence. "Sacrifice your loved ones, or spend eternity in endless torment." I was faced with the most terrifying decision a human being could face. Free my family from eternal suffering by paying the highest possible price, or condemn them to live in this endless nightmare with me. The darkness closed in around me, suffocating any remnants of hope or morality that might still be left in me. Faced with the impossible choice imposed by the demon, I was forced to witness the worst-case scenario. Sarah and Emily, already unrecognizable under the influence of the evil forces, were transformed into creatures of pure horror. My wife, the one who had once been the love of my life, was writhing in indescribable agony, her skin tearing away to reveal layers of putrefying flesh. Her eyes had become bottomless black pits, and her mouth opened in a silent scream of absolute terror. And Emily, my little girl, my greatest treasure, she had become a demonic aberration. Her limbs twisted at unnatural angles, with sharp claws emerging from her delicate fingers. She stared at me with those empty black eyes, her expression a grotesque caricature of the angelic face I loved so much. The demon laughed at my torment, delighting in every ounce of despair that flowed through my veins. I could feel its evil influence spreading, eating away at whatever was left of my humanity. And it was in that moment of absolute darkness that I made the most terrifying and devastating decision of my life. In an act of final desperation, I made the supreme sacrifice demanded by the demon to break the pact. With my own trembling hands, I performed the most unthinkable act a father could ever commit. I took the lives of those I loved most in the world, freeing them from the endless torture they had become. The demon was momentarily stunned by my extreme action. Even that creature of the deepest darkness hadn't expected me to go to such lengths to escape its clutches. But then, its evil laugh echoed through the existential plane, shaking the very foundations of reality. "Did you really think you could defeat me that easily?" he spat, his tentacles wrapping around me with crushing force. And that's how the pact was broken, but at such a devastating cost that it left my soul in ruins. I had sacrificed everything I once loved, everything that made me human, just to escape that endless torment. As I lay there, covered in the blood of my loved ones, I realized that the devil had triumphed in a much more profound way than I could have imagined. He had dragged me down into the darkest depths of despair, destroying my very humanity from the inside out. And as the darkness closed in around me, consuming the last remnants of my torn soul, I realized a terrible truth. The price of salvation can be higher than any human being can bear.